Okay, so we did the Instagram questions videos. We did the rapid fire ones. We did the ones where I took a little bit longer to answer in a 4-minute window, which I was 9 out of 10 on, in case you were wondering. And then
spit on yourself.
Yeah, and then we're with one spit on myself to embarrass myself. And then we're gonna do these ones just more in depth, no timeline. I'm just gonna talk and we'll kind of see where it takes us. You gonna ask the question? That's cue, Mike.
Yeah. So one of the questions on Instagram was, in Ben Bergeron's podcast, he speaks of not wanting his athletes to train with each other year round because he feels they will constantly try to out each other, and this could lead to a pseudo overtraining state. You've recently stated that you want a thriving in-house community for your athletes to push off of each other. Why this thoughtful pursuit, and additionally, how would this happen, being that your gym is individual programming?
Okay.
Click that pin one more time.
Yeah. So this is an in-depth question with a lot of moving components. So you might have to kind of keep me on track, or if I get lost in a rant, stop me and ask the next question or something like that. First of all, if I'm ever responding about another coach's or another human being's perspective, I feel it's somewhat unfair if I haven't done my research. So I haven't listened to the podcast. I don't listen to what they're putting out on a regular basis. So in fairness to him, I'm only answering this question. I'm not going after his ideas because I didn't really vet it. I didn't ask him a question. I don't know what the nuance of his perspective is like and how he does that. So if it comes off that I'm disagreeing with it, I am definitely going to disagree with this perspective, but that doesn't mean I disagree with what he's done. He has 2 athletes that have won the games that fly his flag, so he's obviously doing something right. But I also have no problem disagreeing with anybody and sharing my perspective. So I disagree with that. I think a couple things. First of all, if an athlete doesn't have enough self-awareness and control of their competitive instinct, and they will ruin their health to win a training workout that could potentially compromise their career and their ability to execute on game day, then that is an athlete that needs to be educated on the difference between training and competing. There's a different level of intensity. Now, when Travis and Noah are training together, I know that both of them really want to win, and one of them's happy when they win and one of them's unhappy when they lose. But they shouldn't be losing sleep over that at night. Anytime they lose, it's just like, okay, well, you got to work on that because your competitor is able to do it. The other thing, just the terminology of the question, they'll try to out each other. I've always believed, and I think this just comes from a fighting and wrestling and even football background, and just being involved in high-level sport development over the course of my life, that when we wrestled in the wrestling room, we were trying to destroy each other. Like you're not going out there to make friends when you're training, but in doing so, you build a brotherhood that allows you to go to a competition and have somebody that knows what you went through to go there, that knows what you're going through emotionally, that is helping to alleviate the pressure, because 2 people in a competitive environment, and let's say you have a bad weekend, if you're by yourself and it's all about you and it's not about something bigger than yourself, it's a really, really hard thing to cope with on a regular basis. So one of the things I'm trying to do in my training environment is build a brotherhood or a sisterhood or a community that is bigger than each individual athlete. And you see that in every major sport. You see it in sprinting, swimming, fighting, that people, when they come together for a pursuit at a higher level, are going to do things at a higher level. I think also in this sport, resources are limited. So if you're trying to build a career and it's all about you, and it's not about, hey, I train with these people, like each individual person is only going to be able to attract a certain audience just based on their background, how they talk, what they're good at, how they look. But if somebody thinks that one person is cool, and then they have 10 other training partners. Those other training partners have the benefit of leveraging their social media presences and their and building some sort of value to sponsors from their other teammates. So I think that there are definitely downsides to putting competitive people in the same environment, but then it's kind of your obligation as a coach to ensure that you have control mechanisms in place and an educational system in place to teach people how to utilize a training environment to the best of your ability. So we have different focuses for different types of training sessions. Certain athletes are better at some things than other things. So having somebody next to you when you're doing something, you get your ass kicked in the workout, it's really good to go over and be like, man, I noticed you were really crushing those. Like, what do you think about when you do that? Where do you breathe? Hey, can you do 10 for me? Let me watch. And your speed of adaptation goes up because you can lean on somebody that's better than you. So I've always been an advocate of trying to bring people together. I mean, my business name is Training Think Tank. Like I want to have as many high-level competitors, as many high-level coaches, all in one environment, trying to make people as good as possible. The reality is some people are designed just biologically, psychologically, experientially to be champions, and some aren't. But if all you're focused on is, the competitive output and you winning, and it's all just about winning and losing, and you're not going to be able to deal with that pressure on a regular basis, and somebody's going to break, I think we might be teaching people the wrong thing about sports, because most of these athletes are going to need something else afterwards. So like my business in some ways is a conduit for them to build careers and learn how to teach other people and eventually become coaches and have professional, outlets after their careers. So even if I didn't disagree with the perspective, I still would stand behind why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I think that it's going to fulfill what I think from a vision standpoint I want my business to represent long-term, and I think to try to have the impact I want to have on the fitness and sport world, and because I think it's going to be the environment that's most conducive to give athletes an optimal future.
Awesome. I had some thoughts going through that on, group training effects and looking at other sports and how talent pools are developed. Is that something that you're trying to mimic here? Okay,
yeah. I guess there was a part of a question I didn't cover too about how would it work in our environment if we're doing individual programming? Mm-hmm. Okay, so
how much of it is individual, and how much of it is overlaps where they are doing the exact same things together?
Yeah, so the messaging that you need individual programming came mostly from the fact that people were getting remote coaching. So they didn't have coaches there to individualize things that could be done in person. So if I take any workout, I can come into my training environment, let's say I have 12 people and I know the training needs of all of those people. I could tell each one of them, hey, when you're doing this, this is what your focus is. When you're doing this, this is where your pace needs to be on this. This is where you're dropping the hammer. Hey, for you need to work on this. So this is how we're going to adjust this workout for you. It might put you at a competitive disadvantage because you're using heavier loading, but you're going to do a little bit less reps just so it's, kind of comparable, but you're doing a little bit of a different workout because you have different needs, and you're making scaling adjustments relative to individual training needs. So when you have people in person, you have a much more leeway with regards to the program that they're following, because you can coach them in person on the fly, make technical adjustments, watch somebody in the middle of a workout and be like, they're beat up and they don't have it today. They need to stop now, not 15 minutes later when they're done with the workout, I tell them to go home. But I literally walk over. I've done this with Travis a bunch of times, and every time I do it, he hates me. I'll stop him and say, go home. Or in the middle of the workout, say, this isn't good enough. So you make the decision now if you stop the workout or pick it up and put a games level effort in. Some days he just stops because he literally doesn't have it. And some days he realizes that thought triggers something in his head that he realizes he was blocking his own performance. So a lot of the individual aspect of programming is is going to be able to go away in what we're building. We'll still make individual adjustments. Travis and Noah still have individual needs, so them specifically, if they're training in a high volume phase around 20 times a week, they might share 6 to 10 sessions depending on where they're going. And sometimes those sessions will just be intervals, right? Like it kind of sucks sometimes to be doing like cyclical row intervals by yourself.
Yeah.
So now if I say, hey, instead of you going and resting and you going together, you go and you get off the machine and he goes, and once he's done, he goes, and then you go. So do this workout like together as if it's like a team workout. It allows you to reduce suffering. There's actually research on pain in general that being together and being part of a community and a group actually lessens the pain response in people. So I think that there are going to be a lot of creative ways to explore getting people better, having them in person. Now, there's still always going to be an individual component to it. If somebody gets hurt, they need to get an individual training structure. They're going to get that. Different people with different needs are going to have to, like if there's a barbell cycling day, some people might be cycling a barbell light, some might be cycling heavy, but we'll kind of use a group framework to cover that. And then your question specifically was, am I trying to emulate like the little pockets of places that produce high level talent on a repeated basis? Yeah. I mean, I think having one athlete and showing longevity with that athlete is cool. It's a good proof of concept. Having 2 is cool. Having 2 and a team is cool. Having 2 teams and 10 individuals. Having an army would be coolest, right? Like I want to have as many possible people who believe in what we're doing outside of winning and losing and independent earnings, and actually that know what my ambitions long-term with regards to the fitness industry and sports in general are, and believe that that will have an impact on humanity that leaves the world better than it was when we were born. And so yeah, I think that that's a lofty goal that I would definitely say I'm down for.
Cool. You'll move on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, is there anything that I didn't cover there with regards to the question, just in general?
No, I think you hammered it.
Okay.
This next one is actually in reference to another Ben Bergeron podcast. He talked ideally we should be practicing and training a combined 90% roughly, then competing 10%. Competing meaning you should track your score and attempt to best your previous record. He stated the opposite holds true in your typical CrossFit box because your typical athlete will become bored. What are your thoughts around this as far as training, practicing, and competing?
Okay. So first, back to like, I got to hear it from the horse's mouth. I didn't listen to the podcast. Yeah, I don't want to take anything out of context. If that was a verbatim quote from the podcast, which I don't think it was. I think it was probably a paraphrasing of something that he said and potentially went into more detail on. I would like to see the analysis of his training programs, or even go on to something like Competitor's Blog and see if 90% of the training volume is mathematically, training, and the other 10% is competing, and how you quantify that. Like, how are you quantifying what the stressors of a competition are? If I'm just doing the games I'm doing 13 workouts at the games, does that mean that 130 minus 13 is 117, right? 117 workouts the rest of the year is training, and that's it? Like, or do I count the open workouts? Do I count the regional workouts? Do I count all the off-season workouts? Like, how do you model something so complicated in a statistical way like that? I don't think it's really possible to do so. Now, obviously I'm just nitpicking, so just conceptually competing 10% of the time, I think it's variable relative to what somebody needs to work on. Like Noah, as an athlete, trains at such a lower level relative to what he competes at, and the competitions put such a bigger stressor on him that he has to compete a little bit less frequently, and he has to learn how to train a little bit harder so that he can convert his training horsepower into high-level performances on game day. Travis has been, for years, working on the art of competing and transferring his ability in a training environment into game day. So he just by nature gets a little bit more competition experience. A beginner, assuming they have the requisite level of strength and skill in a sport, needs competition experience to get better at competing in general. So they might need to compete more. A veteran that is getting to the end of their career, that knows they can only monetize for 1 or 2 more years of development, might be competing at every potential competition that they possibly can get into because they're trying to earn money for their family and their career, and they know that the current career that they're in is coming to an end. So coming up with mathematics or statistics to dictate how we distribute training and competition, I just don't think is possible. I mean, I know it's easier to illustrate and convey a point if I say, use the Pareto principle and do 20% of this, 80% of this, but it's not accurate in reality. It's not how the real world works. It's just a little bit too complicated. The next point was about. Oh, you had a question to jump in?
No, I was going to bring up, it's typical athletes becoming bored. Perhaps if they're not competing enough. I think that's what he's referencing. He stated the opposite holds true in typical CrossFit box, because your typical athlete will become bored.
Okay. Man, I got a problem with this. Don't call yourself an athlete if you're not willing to do what you have to do to achieve the goal that you want. If you say, I don't like doing this, it's boring. If I ask the question, is that work making you better at your craft? If the answer to that is yes, then boredom is just an excuse that you're labeling not doing what you think not doing what's required to become as good as you possibly can in the sport. So if somebody comes to me and says, I want to be a high level athlete, I want to be the best in the world, I made these mistakes in my own athletic career of not paying attention to every single detail. And now what I feel my duty as a coach is, if somebody says I want to be the best in the world, is not allow them to let that bullshit govern their behavior. So boredom to me is just something that just should be removed from your vocabulary. I'm bored, well then go pick a different pursuit, because if you're bored doing the things that you have to do in the process to get better and create the outcome you want, then you're not cut of the cloth that actually turns people into athletes. Almost every high-level athlete that you see takes pride in their ability to do what other people aren't willing to do. So we can't, for me, I only cater to what my athletes or what my people want if they're not athletes. If they're athletes, we have a discussion, and when we agree on a plan, I hold them accountable to it. And I don't allow them to let that bullshit step in and stop them from doing what they have to do. So I don't really have as much experience with general population people, if I'm just being honest. Even when I was younger, I always attracted people that tried everything, who were really desperate, because I was reading everything. I was consuming everything. I had hired experts in every field. So people came to me and they're like, I paid this. This is what I did. This isn't working. This person told me this and it didn't work. This doctor told me this. And so I worked with people that were willing to do everything that I said. And when they didn't, I fired them. And I have had a history of firing people. So it might be unfair of me to say that I won't deal with people if they're constantly bored about training. But I honestly just haven't. I don't want to be dealing with people that are having a hard time doing the things that they know they need to do to get better. So if I were running a regular gym, I would try to figure out how to keep people stimulated and keep people engaged, but also give them what they need to progress. If I'm worried just about keeping them engaged, if I keep them there, what am I actually providing other than a a social atmosphere for fun, which does have value, but people can get it anywhere. People can play golf, they can go and join a chess club. Like, they don't need to be doing that with their physical training. And I take physical training just very seriously.
I like that join a chess club. Was
Yeah.
the second thing.
I definitely see the difference, right? Like the approach is very different from athlete to, general fitness. What in general fitness for, a regular gym goer, as they say here, creates the boredom in training? And why would they even get to that point?
Man, I think some of the problem is that people get bored if they're not challenged. And if I reduce my fitness to 14 or 15 movements in a box, like literally and figuratively, and it's all about competition, there are only certain people that are fired up by competition. Like, I have a whole community of people that really love competition, but a lot of people, they just like getting together. They want to learn new skills. They want to try new things. They want to experience life. So I think some of the boredom could just be the business model in and of itself, that, hey, it's not my job to create your life experiences. Like, go on vacations, go try new things. When you come in here, my objective with like my training is that you're pushing yourself and you're getting better at something, and getting people to literally try new skills. Like, hey, try to do different things with the dumbbell, try to do different things with the kettlebell. Let's have a training phase where we're working on freestanding handstands without moving our hands, instead of developing the capacity. If people aren't willing to go hard enough in those 14 different things, or they have dysfunctions that prevent them from doing it because they have bad motor patterns, they sit too much, so they start to do a lot of thrusters, a lot of toes to bar, a lot of handstand push-ups, and then they start to they start to get in pain. They're not winning on a regular basis. Some of their demotivation might be the way they're thinking about fitness in general, and that, I feel like, is one of the times to step in as a coach and be like, hey, or reflect on your own business and say, hey, if my people aren't engaged in what I'm providing, I have a problem. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not doing something correctly. I need to be adjusting my training to create progress and an environment that people are engaged in the pursuit of that progress. If they're not doing that, then how can I really call myself a physical coach? Because they don't want to be doing what I'm defining as physicality. And I haven't found anyone that doesn't want their human bodily experience to feel better. They want to have better sex drives. They want to feel better in the way they look. They want to be able to eat the foods they want and still look in the mirror and think that they look good. They want to be able to play with their kids when they're older. They want to have high energy levels. They want all of those things. So if your environment and the type of training isn't creating those things and isn't creating the reward, then maybe they don't think that what they're doing on a regular basis is worth, like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it just kind of opens an entire Pandora's box about how people potentially define fitness, and how there needs to be or for me at least, or what I do is I create a huge separation between somebody that calls themselves an athlete, whose primary objective is physical progress in a defined subset of variables, and then somebody that just wants to be a person. And then you can figure out, okay, well, as a human, how do you define physical progress? And if the question doesn't start there, they'll probably get bored at some point because they don't have any focus. They're just kind of coming into an environment and,
doing mundane tasks.
Yeah, and just doing something that's mundane after however long, maybe like somewhere between 6 months and 3 years or something. They kind of hit that ceiling of like, oh, this isn't stimulating anymore because I know what it feels like. I kind of know where I fit in the social hierarchy. Those people are too dedicated. I can't beat them. These are noobs. I'll always beat them. And, it kind of just becomes...
Boring.
Yeah, boring. Good word for it.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to add on that. Any other thoughts?
Send us home, Max.
Yeah, I wish I could like come in and just dominate like a 1-sentence mantra that I could make an Instagram tag, but that's just...
Let's bring it back up a little bit.
Yeah,
we talked about how to get out of boredom. So
yeah, I think if I wanted to conclude what I just talked about, excluding the first part of it, like the 90%, 10% thing, like sports are complicated. Like, just figure out how to get better. Like, don't quantify it. Don't overcomplicate your training. Focus on making yourself better at the sport if you want to be an athlete. The second part of it, there was just a lot of philosophical dialogue about fitness training in general, just in the sport of CrossFit, in the CrossFit scheme, and in terms of like CrossFit boxes and all of that stuff. Is, I think it's our obligation. Like, I know CrossFit is kind of going after some of the American Dietetics Association and some of the lobbyist groups, and we really, as a culture that has kind of followed in Greg Glassman's wake, we have kind of become the front lines for health. And I know for a long time that was personal trainers, sometimes general medical practitioners, but with the way insurance is going and where the economy is and where people's debt profiles are, that just becomes harder and harder to do on a regular basis. And I think people are they're just unhappy in their day-to-day lives. They are bored, they're not stimulated. So with what we do in the fitness sector, I feel like it is a moral imperative to force people to be better. And then it is our job to ask them in that process of pushing them how we can make it enjoyable. So I try to always tell my athletes, and I try to remind myself all the time because I put myself through so much punishment, that it's our job to find the fun in the process, but it's not our job to make the process fun. So I think that's just a good mantra for figuring out how to organize your physical training in a way that you are stimulated as a coach, and then all of your athletes underneath you are stimulated. If you're not, find a new environment.
Cool. Yeah, that kind of change can be stressful and very challenging to go through.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
If you're drudging through mud, you need to, and being bored with the task or training is turned into a chore or a job, you got to make some change.
Yeah, I don't remember who I was listening to, but I listened to a podcast about relationships. And somebody said, if you talk to the future person and you said like, man, how much stress were you going through like for that breakup? And like, how much did you think about like, oh, what are they going to think? What's going to happen? You would be like, that was the most stressful decision ever. But if you talk to the future person, they're like, thank God that happened. Like, that was the catalyst for like the best time in my life, or me finding the person that actually did life. I think the same thing is true. Like, it's just life. It progresses and adapts. Like, you have a coach for a period of time and you move on from them, and they get new challenges and you get new challenges, and there's no harm in that. I think people maybe fear the potential of like loss in earnings or loss in income or feeling like being a newbie again. But for me, I love the process of feeling like a beginner. So I enjoy change probably more than other people. But I think it's a good lens to look at the world through. Yeah,
this is great. That sparked an idea in another video I think we should do on the coach-client time relationship and what that looks like over time.
Like the life cycle?
Yeah, the life cycle. There you go.
Cool. Bam!
Time to wrap it up. There's the moo cow.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thank you to the people who asked these questions.
Yeah, that's all the questions. Yeah, so that's all the questions.
The other videos. Go back and watch those.
Go back. We did a rapid fire. We did 2 rapid fire videos, and then we did 2 videos that were each 5 questions long that I took about 4 minutes to do each question on, and then this one. So these 5 videos that came out were all from directly, one Instagram post, and all people that were watching our YouTube videos. So thank you for watching them, and thanks for engaging and asking questions. And maybe in the future we'll hit them.
Questions turned into.
Yep. This is biting my own words. Like, Instagram is useful.